Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Simplified, the podcast which will make you sound smarter without actually making you so. Just the two of us today.
Yeah, it's the OG gang, right? It's nice to get these young, when a company, these startups especially, when they start growing, in order to retain talent, they will rebrand these guys as co-founders. So you have 3 years down the line, somebody becoming a co-founder. So that's the way Simplified has become because of these miscreants who have wormed their way into houses. So it's nice, Naren, to just have when was the last time just the two of us recorded? Don't tell me it was an infamous 150th episode which went on forever.
It was, years, literally years ago. We've been in all possible combinations, but just the two of us, I can't remember.
Yeah, it feels nice, like the good old days.
Like the good old days. No, actually, I don't know. Like the old days. I don't know if the good old days.
Like the old days.
Yeah.
It's been a while. We've been doing this for a while.
Pretty sure that Srikeit and Tony bring much needed increase in the quality and lack of bullshit, which is what we're going to talk about today.
That's a quality segue. So this is very likely, what we are doing right now is very likely to be the last recording that we do for this year. Next week, we have something special that's going to come out for you. And you'll wait and see what that is. But it's kind of poignant that it's just the two of us to do what might be the last actual recording for this year. Naren, and when we were brainstorming, what can we talk about? Do we summarize the year? Do we talk about our personal journeys of this year or something grand, something poignant? And then you said, no, young, we shall talk about bullshit. So Naren, please take it away.
Yeah.
I think we should call it, by the way, I don't know what the censorship rules on the podcast are right now. So if we keep saying bullshit, we might just get a lot of beeps. So let's just call it BS from now on.
Yeah. So the thing is, there is a lot of BS that goes around. I guess it was always around. It's just that we have so many more channels for it that it seems to be everywhere all the time. And one of the biggest contributors to BS is the need people feel to hold an opinion on everything, right? So I have seen this in my personal experience. I'm pretty sure you guys have too, that literally anything, everyone has an opinion, regardless of whether they know anything about it or not, right? And so people race to comment on news stories, on incidents. Recently, someone was telling me on how the recent skirmish in the Arunachal Pradesh was very bad and the Modi government was trying to cover it up or something like that. And how do you know? And he really doesn't, right? So I don't know whether it's true or not. And that, to my mind, is the quintessential quality of BS. That you comment regardless of so you don't care whether it is true or a lie. You just say something.
You just say for some kind of signaling, right? It could be virtue signaling. It could be to show what tribe you belong to. Or it could be to kind of show that, hey, I am a thinker in this kind of direction or something. The quintessential LinkedIn bullshitter, right? Where you'll make an entire long post out of your phone falling down or your cat meowing on your face in the morning or something and then drawing an entire management lesson out of that. So that, I suppose, is there is a very fine line for those who are asking between BSing and ultra-crepidarianism, which is what we have done on Simplified. But that is for another episode. Another day. Yeah. We do not do BS. We are very proud of this.
We are ultra-crepidarian.
Yeah, I think we are so upfront about the fact that we don't know anything that you can't call it BS. I think that's another quintessential quality of bullshitters, right? That they don't know or they won't admit to the fact that they are BSing, even if their heart of hearts they know that they are. Could this be another? Because it's another matter if your friend actually said whatever he or she did out of conviction, that there was some logic to what they were saying,
It's a statement of fact. Right? So the statement is that there was a skirmish on the Arunachal Pradesh border, okay? And the news that we've got is some 30 Indian soldiers were injured and some maybe 30 or more than 30 Chinese soldiers were injured. There was no loss of life. And then they had a meeting and they had a meeting to de-escalate the conflict. That was what everyone knows about it because obviously no one's been there. Whatever the government reports is what you know.
Yeah.
And what this gentleman is saying is that, no, it's actually a full-scale war, but the government doesn't want to tell you that because it doesn't want you to panic. So that, to my mind, is just bullshit. Because he couldn't know. It might be true.
Yeah.
But there is absolutely no way anyone could know about it.
No, I'm trying to see what the etymology was, and I'm just reading off Wikipedia itself. Your bull, meaning nonsense, dates from the 17th century, where the term bullshit has been used as early as 1915 in British and American slang and came into popular usage only during World War II. There we go. Another thing that World War II has given us. The word bull itself may have derived from the Old French boll, meaning fraud and deceit. The term horseshit is a near synonym and occasionally used South African English equivalent, although more common in Australian slang, is bull dust. So this is kind of interesting. So the French etymology is true, then the bull in bullshit is not exactly the bovine. It's coming from something else.
Yeah.
I suppose.
There's another word for this called bunkum. Is used in America.
Yeah, bunkum and then bollocks.
So bunkum comes from a place called Buncombe, Buncombe, and Buncombe is a county in North Carolina. It's a place in North Carolina, and the reason it's called Buncombe is there was a representative from that place named Felix Walker. So what Felix Walker did, this was in 1820. He stood up and gave a completely pointless and long speech in the House of Representatives, which was so bad that finally his own party people told him, boss, please shut up and sit down. They actually pulled his coat and made him sit down. And ever since, in America, it's known as bunkum. Well, of course, it's been superseded by the far more elegant term bullshit. But yeah, bunkum is also what it used to be called.
So what drew you to speaking about this, Naren?
We were basically, a few friends were discussing this tendency of politicians especially, but everyone in general, to speak about something as if they knew about it without any regard to whether whatever they were saying are lies or truth. So there is a difference between lying and there's a difference between lying and bullshitting, right? So lying is when I deliberately tell you a lie. So, for example, I don't know, you ask me if, are you going to be in town on Friday? And I say, I am going to be in town, but I'm telling you a lie. No, I'm traveling on Friday. So that is a deliberate lie. Bullshit would be, is never specific. So I will tell you something. I heard from someone that there's an asteroid going to hit the Earth on Thursday night, so it doesn't matter whether I'm going to be on Friday or not, because all of us are going to be gone, something like that. So if I knew for sure, then that would be different. Or if I knew for sure it's not going to hit, that would be a lie. This is just bullshit. And it becomes a problem when people start using this in the political discourse. It rouses the worst in people. There are a lot of, emotions which are needlessly charged just because a standard thing is you have stories about one particular community. In the US, it'll be black people, or maybe black people make up stories about white people. I don't know how it goes. But there's really no truth in it. And even the teller of those stories has no idea whether it's true or not. So the question is, how do you identify bullshit?
Is it, so before you get into that, I'm just trying to, again, reconcile the differences between lying and bullshitting, right? So is it something like a lie leads to a bullshit later? Like initially somebody might start off spreading a piece that they know is deliberately false, hence they're lying. Once it reaches somebody who might semi-believe in it and add their own biases and beliefs to it, much like how you might concoct a story to say you're not in town or whatever it is, then it moves to the realm of bullshit, or they use that as a base to further amplify their own beliefs. Is it something like that? Like, I'm just trying to...
I think that the originator of the lie, would possibly have an agenda. It would, he or she would have an agenda. Yeah, they want certain things to happen or certain things not to happen, which is why they're telling the lie in the first place.
Yeah.
But the propagators of that thing, now you told me something, a lie, and I go somewhere else and tell it as a fact without any regard to whether it's true or not, then I become a bullshitter. That's one kind of bullshitter. And the second kind is what we find a lot in professional circles is people giving opinions on things which they know nothing about. And even that is pretty injurious. So, for example, you are in the digital marketing space and you are in an organization, you're working, and this is something you know a little bit about, and somebody is letting off on that topic, which you know isn't true at all. It's not specifically false either, but a lot of it is wild stuff.
Yeah. So I've actually found this nice. Yeah, go on.
So that could be one kind of bullshit is what
I found like a nice little table with 3 differences. So liars versus BSers, and I cannot believe that we are actually seriously academically discussing this, but hey, the Simplified has done worse. Liars engage in a conscious act of deception, whereas BSers don't consciously deceive. Interesting. 2, liars know the truth but attempt to hide it. I think that's important. And BSers don't know or care about the truth. That's, again, kind of interesting. And lastly, liars spread untruths but still accept the distinction between truth and false, whereas BSers ignore or reject the distinction between truth and falsity altogether. And I think all of those are very nice. I can almost picture, where Trump falls and where a marketing guy on LinkedIn falls and stuff like that. So yeah, for the purpose of this, let's stop doing semantics and come back to BSing itself.
Other thing is, you would, from all the ongoing discussion, you would think that we don't like bullshitting, right? So we don't like people who bullshit, or we don't like the bullshit itself. But it's so there is this author named Eric Ambler. He's a turn of the century author, writer of detective stories and all. So he had a story called Dirty Story, in which a character
Tony would say that he was ambling in.
Yeah.
This is why we need Tony. This is why we need Tony for the good jokes. We miss you, Tony.
So a character named Arthur Simpson recalls advice that he received as a child from his father. And this is what Simpson's father told him. Although I was only 7 when my father was killed, I still remember him very well. And some of the things he used to say. One of the first things he taught me was, never tell a lie when you can bullshit your way through. This presumes, that not only is there an important difference between lying and bullshitting, but that the latter is preferable to the former. So it's a point of view, right? It's very difficult to see under what circumstances that might be true. But there is also this question about what is truth. So this truth itself, I mean, philosophers have written reams and reams about how, and there is a school of thought which believes that there is no objective truth, right? It's all very subjective. And what could be true for me could quite possibly be untrue for you.
Yeah.
So in such a world where truth itself is difficult to define or know, can you fault someone for bullshitting? Because if you had to tell the truth all the time and you didn't know what the truth was, you'd not be able to say anything at all.
Yeah.
There's this famous story about this philosopher named Ludwig Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein was quite a character, and he was a really brilliant guy. He was, I think, in Cambridge. He was there was a group in Cambridge called the Apostles of Cambridge, turn of the century. And it had people like Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein himself, and G.H. Hardy, who is more famously known as Ramanujan's collaborator.
Okay.
Right. So Wittgenstein had a biographer, one lady, I forget her name, something, and she wasn't well. She had a sore throat or something. So this guy goes to visit her, and she tells him that I feel awful. I feel like I like a dog who's been run over. That's what she says. And then Ludwig Wittgenstein says, but how can you know what a dog who has been run over feels like? So bullshit completely collapses when you have a nitpicker in the company, right? So if you bullshit, then yes, a good nitpicker can tear you apart in minutes, if not in hours.
Yeah. It's maybe kind of worth thinking about what the role of BS could be from like we always like to go back to evolutionary sort of perspectives, right? Like like one of the things that that's famously mentioned in Sapiens is the role of gossip in bringing people closer together, which is important for civilizations, etc., etc. Which is kind of like an interesting way of looking at it. So, what role could BS really serve? I'm just trying to think out loud.
At least in my limited experience, people who BS, right, they get a momentary high because they are holding the stage, and they are saying things that no one can directly contradict.
Sure.
And that's what basically, I suppose, the high is. You just feel great. You feel you have won the day, and it takes a while for people to unpackage BS. There is that, because if you are constantly BSing, people stop taking you seriously after a while.
Yeah, it's probably a decent short-term strategy, but not so much in the long term, right? Once you get caught out, and I'm sure everyone listening to this can think of one colleague that seemed impressive at one point of time, but if that turned out to be BS and if it has the habit of repeating that, then they would probably not be in everyone's best books or have a great reputation after that. So that's kind of interesting. It's sort of like, I suppose, a way to get ahead without doing the rigor of actual work, research, thinking, if that makes sense. Or it could also just be a way to kind of cover up saying, I don't know. And a lot of people, especially Indians, have trouble saying I don't know, or just the word no itself, N-O itself.
Yeah.
So BS could just be a way of, covering that up. I remember somebody somewhere saying, I think when I was at MICA on research, professor said that Indians are terrible at saying no. They'll just build some cockamamie excuse or the other to get out of it, rather than saying they'll say yes and then they'll worry about how to say no later, which is something that our producer might know. Once we commit to a time, we keep BSing our way out of it. But anyway, sorry about that. And again, I think all of these somewhere, it's partly imagination, right? If you look at BS from a slightly positive perspective, it is a little bit of imagination. You are conjuring up fictions of some type to account for a situation. So again, I'm being a little too charitable about BS altogether. But I suppose even all that nonsense that you see on LinkedIn, there is a certain amount of craft in some sense that goes behind it.
Oh yes. So here's the thing, right? So there is a difference between complex and complicated. So a lot of engineering problems are complicated. But if you drill down, there is, for example, if you're writing some code and there are like a lot of really crazy edge cases, use cases, and variables passing through or whatever happens in coding, and it takes a team of engineers to really, think it through, work it, debug it, test it out, and months of effort, if not years. But you figure it out. In the end, it sorts out. And that is complicated.
Yeah.
But complex is something different. Complex could be very, it might not have as many layers as the complicated thing. It'll be like, marketing problems are notoriously complex, right? So it's just not, so you have a company which sells some goods or services and they used to be selling very well. They don't sell now and there is no obvious reason. And now you want, or everything is going fine, but you just want the sales, or you want your sales to increase another, 10%, 5%, whatever.
Yeah. And famously, go on.
Yeah. And there are a dozen knobs you can twiddle. You don't know which one to twiddle. Right? Because there is nothing, everything is linked to everything else. Do you give, let us say you're selling pajamas, do you give discounts? If you give discounts, do you think people perceive it? What happened if someone like Rolex gave a discount? They would lose in value, right? No one will buy a Rolex anymore. Like that. So complex.
You're saying that is complicated. That is complicated, you're saying.
Complex.
That is complex, what you said right now. So give me another example. Complicated versus complex. This is interesting.
Yeah. Complicated is if you have a piece of machinery, like, your car, right?
Yeah.
So the rear wheels, the car rear wheels have something known as a differential. The differential is a very clever piece of mechanism, right? So when you're taking a turn, the wheel on the outside of the turn has to cover a larger distance than the wheel on the inside. So the wheel on the inside the revolutions have to decrease, and the wheel on the outside, the revolutions have to increase by a proportional amount. otherwise your car will just skid.
Yeah.
And that gearing system inside the differential does exactly that.
Wow.
It's pretty complicated. I
So
really
that is
suggest
complicated.
anyone.
So that's complicated. Why is that not complex though? Because in casual language,
Because,
I may say.
Yeah, so it's the same, but it is not complex because it can be worked out. Complex is it can't be worked out despite all your efforts.
Complexes, it can't be worked out. Complicated. Okay, but both of them are equally difficult.
They're difficult in different ways. Like metaverse, for example, right? So Zuckerberg took the step to convert his Facebook into metaverse for whatever reason it was. And he couldn't work out the implications.
Right.
So some people say that some people say it's a great move. Some people say it's suicide. No one knows, it's still playing out. No one knows. Like Elon Musk has taken over Twitter and he has the job of making Twitter a better place, get more revenue, make the user experience better. And there are literally hundreds of solutions or suggestions that are coming his way, which they're impossible to implement simultaneously.
Yeah. So
that's a complex
problem. So complicated. So that's complex. So complicated would be a CEO taking over a firm where the path to profitability is known but super difficult. Right?
Yeah.
It's something. Okay, interesting. I think a lot of interesting semantics over there for BS versus lying and complicated versus complex. So let's give our ad versus break, whatever you want to call this. But before that, we will discuss more about this on the other side of this ad break. Who knows? Welcome back to this fascinating discussion on a whole lot of things. But before I let Naren go again, Naren, what's the one place in Mumbai where it is impossible to find your destination? BKC, because it is Bandra Kurla complicated.
You had a joke, right? You have a Bandra Kurla complex or something.
Something like that. I think it was something like ever since offices started moving from South Bombay to Central Bombay, Nariman Point had a Bandra Kurla complex. It was some very convoluted, complicated. It was now I'm going to think about this every time. This is complicated joke.
A complicated joke about a complex. Yeah.
Actually, most people listening to this will be just say it's a piece of BS. So let's come back to that. There's this other fascinating thing. I'm sure you have come across this, if not read the book already. It's a book called Bullshit Jobs by an anthropologist, I think, called David Graeber. I forget what it is. It's one of the most... every time I post about it or I see somebody posting about it, there are either people who are vociferously defending the thesis or people like, whatever. The basic construct is that humans have invented a lot of jobs to keep themselves busy. And many of these jobs, if you think about it, don't really need to exist. And very likely, the more bullshit the job is, the smaller and smaller the audience it serves is. Because if you think of something like a doctor, that serves a whole lot of people, and that's definitely not a bullshit job. Similarly for teachers, right? But then when you come to, say, arguably lawyers, now you're serving a slightly smaller audience and the bullshit ratio becomes a little more. You go into hedge fund management and that's a lot of bullshit serving a very small audience, so on and so forth. When you have increasingly, sharper and sharper jobs like this. What do you think, Naren? I thought that was an interesting thesis when it first come out.
Yeah, so I would define a bullshit job as one where it's virtually impossible to be measured. Your performance can't be measured.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so if you are you have a production job. Okay, you're in charge of producing widgets, and every day your factory makes 100 widgets. And the management says, no, you have to make 102. Then you can, you can hire a consultant to tell you how to increase your production, given everything is the same. And, he would be a productivity consultant. He'll tell you, oh, no, you're getting this stuff from from your left hand side and passing it to your right. But if you tell your workers to take it on the right hand, pass it to the left, you'll get a 2% increase or whatever. So those things can be measured then, and at the end of the period. So those concerns. But there is someone you would hire to increase organizational morale. Now, how do you measure organizational morale? So it is still, there are people who do very good work in this area. I'm not saying they all be, bullshitters, but it's very difficult to
I think that might be
measure
the case.
people.
Yeah. So my counter to that is, I think, without getting into value judgment about what is quote unquote BS, the way we spoke about in the first half of this show, I think there will always be jobs across the spectrum that can be measured and can't be measured. Like if you take the classical quote unquote bullshit job, like something like what a hedge fund manager does. Now, that's a highly measurable job, like in terms of how much money you made, this exact person, how much the portfolio grew by, extremely, extremely measurable, right? On the other hand, maybe something
why would it be a BS bullshit job?
No, so again, that's why I said quote unquote, because the way Graeber defines it is that these are all just jobs that people have invented to keep each other, to keep themselves busy and stuff like that. That's where it's coming from. And the fact that it's increasingly specialized, serving the needs of a smaller and smaller audience. I think one way of looking at this, Naren, is if you were stranded on a desert island, who are the people who you'd want around you? Would you really want, you'd want a doctor, you would want a chef, do you really want a hedge fund manager? So I think that's one, short heuristic of looking at it. But so the thing is this, right? So take any job profession that you think is BS, there's going to be some aspect of that is measurable. Like if you take a non-BS job, let's take a nurse, for instance, how do you measure what they do, right? How do you measure the impact that they have? Sure, you can break it down. Like if you really sit down, you can say, okay, tended to this many people, etc. The problem I always feel is when you put numbers to things like that, then the numbers are the things that are optimized for. Like if suddenly number of patients tended to on a night or on a shift becomes a metric, that possibly means that efficacy in each, for each patient or some patient will suffer. That's
a very good. There's a very good point, because there might be a patient who needs, it's a life and death situation, needs to be monitored constantly through the night. And the nurse would have attended to exactly one patient.
I think Dr. Nitin spoke about this a lot when he came onto the show. So that's the thing, right? So I am a little.
No, that's a very good point.
Yeah, I'm a little wary about, and at the same time, there are lots of BS jobs across the spectrum again, which you can put numbers just for the sake of it. I have been to many meetings, for instance, where team after team will walk in and present a whole slide of impressive-looking numbers, giving the illusion that they've done a lot of work. But in reality, they haven't. For somebody who does, like, I actually think that one of the greatest challenges of jobs, whether they are BS or not, is the non-measurability of a lot of professions that deserve more in some sense, right? Teachers, for instance, should they be always judged by the academic performance of their students, or is it like a we went from here to here? Like, I have benefited a lot by speaking to my therapist, but if I were to ask to rate him, how do I assign? He gives me this little slider scale, but I find it very weird to say, okay, you help me on a scale of 1 to 5. I find it very weird to, assign numbers to something like this. But I think that's a larger conversation. Can we really quantify the world that we live in? Can we quantify our experience as humans? People who give us a 4.7-star rating for this podcast on Spotify and Apple, thank you, all of you, first of all, and the rest of you, please go ahead and do it. But what does that really mean? Like, I think the whole aspect of rating, I think, is an interesting conversation by itself to have for another day. But I think one way of thinking about it, I suppose, is how many people does this job have an impact for? Like, how many people's lives is this profession really changing or impacting?
So that definition, before I go on to that, I have to tell you my favorite therapist joke.
Oh, okay.
Can I tell you? Yeah.
Yes, please.
So this guy is telling his friend, my therapist finally said something which brought tears to my eyes. After 10 years of therapy. No, he said, no hablo English. Yeah. So what you say, I mean, regarding the BS and non-BS nature of jobs, we are biased towards people whose jobs are very specific, right? So
Yeah.
tailors important, doctors very important, teachers important, cobblers important. Would a sports coach be important? I don't know. Would somebody who puts organizational values into a matrix and would that person be important? So it's very difficult. So I used to have a very low opinion of quote unquote management consultants, right? And then one of my young friends had got into a really big consulting firm, and he challenged me. He says, you know what, I disagree with your sweeping statement that we are all bullshitters. And then he showed me some of his work. And it was about, so they were doing, they were studying somebody's business and giving that, and he showed me how insightful he had some 15 slides. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, okay, man, that is insightful. So with those insights, the CEO of that business will be able to really turn his organization around. So I can't really tell you, but a big company, that much I can tell you. Yeah.
That's fair. And I will use the same situation. There are in a completely different company, a different consultant might just give the CEO what they want to hear.
Right? That happens all the time, I'm sure.
That happens. Yeah, that happens all the time. And that happens a lot in the client-agency relationship as well, because as a result of which the work itself is BS in some sense, right? If it's come together for the common good of the company and not necessarily the retainer or the salary, then I suppose there is an element of whatever the opposite of BS BS is. I don't know how we ended up getting into this nice path about.
I have an interesting. I have an interesting question to ask you. I haven't been able to really come up with anything, but you and I, we both work for a living, and we constantly encounter bullshitters, right? So and people who are not bullshitting, you tend to have a built-in sort of
that's what you have a sort of radar, a BS radar of sorts.
Yeah. And that comes with experience. So I remember when I was much younger, just starting out, and someone senior says something, and you would listen to it with, wide open eyes, and you would it would be gospel truth. Yeah. And many years later, as your experience grew, you realize that they know as little about it as you do, right? So what, in your view, is a good thumb rule or some thumb rules for detecting bullshit?
I think the person should be able to distill it down to first principles eventually, right? If somebody says something, you ask why, then they should be able to say what that why is. And then you ask a why for that as well. And then you keep going down. Maybe it takes 2, maybe it takes 5 levels to eventually get down to something that is a fundamental truth. Consumers think this way, or in advertising, it would be all men are driven by either want of money or sex or food or whatever it is. It basically comes down to some fundamental truth that way. If they try to deviate and reflect and say something like, oh, that's the way it's always been done, or that's the way the brand has always, then they don't have a very solid answer. For whatever it is that they're saying. So that to me is one for sure. I
agree with you. Yeah.
I would say this is more for BS possibility and not so much BS detection. If it's something that's coming from a person's lived experience, then I will take that much more credible than somebody who is just I've worked with a lot of people who really haven't gone out on the field and got their hands dirty. Their juniors have sent them a report and they're like, okay, see, take it. And then it is admirable to some level how they will then BS in meetings as if they were the ones who actually went onto the field. And I suppose that's a skill by itself, and I guess that's what they're paid for. But I think that to me is the moment somebody's got their hands dirty, right? I know, for instance, you will not BS about the work that you do in the factory because, you have got your hands in some sense literally dirty over there. So I know you won't BS on that. So to me, these are the two sort of BS detectors, if that makes sense. Yeah. I think the moment you ask your first why, the moment you ask your first why, you'll understand which direction is this going really.
So true. I've had that experience, and I've also been so one is too much talk, too much detail, too much too many
And
anecdotes, too
another
many
one I would say, Naren, another one I would say is too much adherence to what society or whatever things should be the right answer for this. And for this, the best example I can give you is SOPs on management entrance exam forms. I was on the panel for Micah a few years, as in, like, I was asking, not on the other side. I was on the other side also twice, but I was on the thankfully on the other side more often. And out of every 100 people who would apply, about 50, 60 of them would just write something that Chat GPT probably would be able to do a better job of, right from first. And because it's Micah, everyone wants to show off the creative, this thing, saying, okay, I won a essay writing contest in my first standard. Ever since I thought I would be creative, I saw ad, blah, 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 blah. And the moment you then question them on that, okay, what's your favorite ad? And then they give you something. And then you ask them, okay, why is that your favorite ad? And then, they really, really stumble. And then they try to make up something on the spot, which really comes back to BS, but then you have some that are really, really honest, which may not follow the standard template of things. Their parents might be shocked that they've actually written out things like this. I remember one of my seniors, if I'm not mistaken, actually wrote their SOP in verse, which, again, it just stands out. It does the job that it's supposed to. It's not traditional. But yeah, I think, I think stuff like that is really, if it tries too hard to adhere to what society or, the guidebook says that it should be, then I think the setting is ripe for BS. I'm not saying that the outcome will necessarily be BS, but I think it just makes it easier to slip back into the, what the guidebook says should be the answer. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it's like, some situations are like a warm petri dish full of the right nutrients for bullshit. It blooms, right? You have this colony of bullshitters which grow. So I think every organization also needs, especially from the top, needs some mechanism to cull the bullshit out. So
I think this is going to be a very important skill in the 21st century. I mean, all jokes apart, because of many, many reasons. So one article that I read came across recently, I think we had shared it in our group, I forgot whether we did, is an English teacher who actually wrote about the potential positive impact of Chat GPT on essays. I forget if it was a his or a her, but they had written that, listen, this is not a bad thing necessarily. Like, we should accept the fact that we live in a society right now where technology like this exists. And we shouldn't be worrying about, this is going to destroy homework. The fact of the matter is, if a technology like this exists, homework in its current form probably deserves to be destroyed. And we need to think about how to use this in a different way. So rather than writing, you should be spending your time, you should be teaching students to judge the output of these things and then construct on that, goes on to argue, saying that detection, whether this was generated by an AI, where to poke holes in it, and all that is going to become a way more valuable skill than understanding the difference between a verb and an adjective, for instance, in 2020 onwards. And I think that was quite a poignant way of looking at it. And I can imagine the same thing about DALL-E 2 and all that as well.
I have an analogy. So when I was studying engineering, we had to do all our drawing. So engineering drawing is a big subject,
paper.
Right?
Yeah.
On paper. You have to use a drafter and set squares and T-squares and, And today everything is done on CAD, right? So the skill aspect is gone. So when we were doing, when you had this big board and you had to do a drawing, you needed to be very skilled. Some people who are skilled, their drawings would look beautiful. Yeah. They knew how hard to draw a line or how lightly to do a cross hatching and so on and so forth. It's all gone now in the CAD. So now people have to focus more on what the drawing represents or what the design is supposed to convey or whatever. So ChatGPT is going to be like that. So when everyone uses ChatGPT, the words and the grammar and the syntax are in place. You can make it flowery, less flowery. But people will be forced to confront what it actually says, right? So that's your thought. And that has to be, that has to be unique, that has to be insightful, that has to be something which is worth something for someone else.
Yeah, exactly. Again, goes back to BS, right? So BS is not
Yeah.
useful to anyone except possibly the speaker itself. I think it's interesting. I think we have covered a whole ground over here. Any other angles, any other aspects of
No,
BS that you can
this
think of?
is one of those topics which, because it's so complex as opposed to complicated, can go on forever and ever and ever. At some time, I think we have to sort of just let listeners decide for themselves and try and figure out what their own BS in their own universe means. So, folks, yeah, signing off here. Stay safe, stay uncomplicated, and stay simplified.